Super Mario Odyssey is a video game that people seem to either love or hate, and I think understanding whether someone will enjoy it ultimately comes down to what sort of things they enjoy doing in their video games. Back in the day, Mario games were two-dimensional platforming obstacle courses, but the shift to the third dimension brought with it an emphasis on exploration that simply didn't exist in older titles outside of the occasional spin-off. At the time, the progression and design from Super Mario World to Super Mario 64 was fairly logical, but hindsight has shown that, for all the innovation Mario's first polygonal platformer brought to the table, it doesn't directly iterate on what the prior Mario titles had already established. It would be really nice if 3D Mario games could be cleanly slotted into categories that described what they were trying to do, but that's not really how these titles were developed. Games like Mario 64, Sunshine, and Galaxy were designed to have massive worlds to explore, but they also had their metaphorical linear platforming cake and wanted to eat it too, creating a sort of design dichotomy within each of these titles. This all changed when Super Mario 3D Land released on the 3DS in 2011 and firmly picked a side. It would do away with open worlds entirely, bringing the obstacle courses that made Mario famous into the third dimension. The title performed so well that it warranted a sequel, one which released on the Wii U in 2013 and perfected what 3D Land started while simultaneously integrating elements from prior 3D Marios into the more linear format. Unfortunately, no amount of effort on Nintendo's part could negate the desire a number of fans had to run around a sandbox and collect things, and being on Nintendo's worst-selling home console at the time didn't help matters, so as such, the title underperformed. When Mario Odyssey was revealed, it seemed like it was trying to do what Super Mario 3D Land and World accomplished, but in the other direction. It would be an uninhibited commitment to the exploration-focused Mario formula, ditching anything resembling a level structure in favor of dropping players into an area and letting them run around and collect whatever their hearts desired.
It's freedom like you never knew.
But now, with the game released, it's clear that this was the fatal flaw of Mario Odyssey. Nintendo didn't have any idea how to fully commit to that idea. After all, they had never done it before. The hit 3D platforming sandboxes released on their systems back in the day were made by second and third party developers like Rareware, Sucker Punch, and Crystal Dynamics. Every 3D platformer Nintendo had ever made up to that point had always used a mission or level based structure as a frame for the exploration. Even in the most open and expansive of levels, there was always clear direction. Despite how large and expansive the worlds of Odyssey seem, linearity is shoved into the game wherever it can fit. Level design pushes the player down a fairly narrow path in most levels, with a sweeping camera introduction to emphasize a metaphorical flagpole. The world map is a straight shot to a fairly clear end goal, with only 2 instances of choice to give the player an illusion of openness outside of levels. The most obvious form of linearity in Odyssey is its numerous challenge rooms, which are perhaps best described as worse implementations of concepts that 3D World perfected. The dash panels from 3D World were used in some of the most interesting levels of the entire game, but challenges in Odyssey that use its comparable flower equivalent are tests of patience and exercises in frustration. The single camera direction and tighter control of the Plessy segments in 3D World make them far less frustrating than the ice physics and loose camera of Jaxi segments in Odyssey. Even outside of Mario's handling, basic platforming challenges in 3D World are often more complex and interesting than anything Odyssey attempts to do in its challenge rooms. What Odyssey has that 3D World doesn't have is the world outside of the challenge rooms, but it's hard to enjoy that world when it's not rewarding to explore. It doesn't matter how many coins or stars or moons are in a game when the act of getting them doesn't feel rewarding. Ground pounding a glowing spot doesn't feel rewarding. Kicking a rock for 2 minutes doesn't feel rewarding. Finding and collecting a moon in a hard to reach spot does feel rewarding. But why do that when you can get the same collectible for something markedly easier? It doesn't help matters when rewarding experiences in Odyssey are often actively gated and discouraged. In many cases, players are forced into replaying segments multiple times. Good performance at a task isn't rewarded until the game decides that it wants to reward you for that task. Finding a neat secret area may lead to nothing until the game decides to put a moon there later on. Moments like these actively discourage players from truly exploring levels until the post-game, but after the credits roll, moons lose their value immensely. Some players may inherently want to collect things for the sake of collecting them, but most want the game to reward them with something tangible. In platforming-focused games, giving value to completion is easy, because the best reward for platforming is more platforming. But instead of rewarding players in a supposedly exploration-focused game with more exploration, Odyssey rewards players with a weak linear platforming challenge. It's a shame when considering how much of the fundamentals were designed from the ground up for exploration. Mario's handling is fantastic for the open world, with Mario speeding up as he runs down hills and slowing down when making a climb upward. Physics playing a significant role in where Mario moves at any given moment, but it's not as great in linear platforming segments. The camera, while not perfect, is easily the best in an exploration-focused 3D Mario game, but it makes depth perception so much more cumbersome in Odyssey's numerous challenge rooms than with the fixed camera angles of 3D World stages. All of this seems to indicate that Nintendo's big problem with developing Mario Odyssey was that they didn't know how to challenge the player on anything other than platforming. The game rarely tests the player's actual ability to explore, which is surprising for an exploration-focused video game. When they wanted to increase the difficulty, they merely increased the difficulty of the stuff in the levels rather than the difficulty of actually exploring them to begin with. No matter what level you're in, there are still glowing spots to ground pound and rocks to kick. Exploration is static in Super Mario Odyssey. So how do you solve that flaw? Well, the simple way is to not design your game around exploration to begin with. Mario is a character designed primarily as a platforming mascot, and it's clear that while many players enjoy his more explorative moments, Mario definitely is best running and jumping. But as vocal as 3D World supporters are, there's an undeniable majority that love seeing Mario run and jump around a more open and expansive world. But with all of Mario's prior 3D entries having linearity stuffed into them, from Mario 64's Bowser levels to Odyssey's challenge rooms, it's hard to say whether Mario ever has the potential to truly succeed in an exclusively open world. That was what I was going to say until I booted up Super Mario 64 one more time.
Hey, Mario!
This here is Koopa the Quick. He's the second mission in the game for most players. As his name might suggest, his life is racing, and his goal is to beat you at a race to the top of Bomb Battlefield. He gets bitter if you try and cheat with the cannon, but outside of that, anything is fair game. Unfortunately, Bomb Battlefield is a pretty linear level, but there are still a number of path options open to the player that make the race interesting. In addition to the more standard objective of platforming to the goal, Koopa the Quick also tests the player on their knowledge of the level's layout and asks the player to find the quickest path. While nothing mind-blowing, it is a test of exploration. Transplanting these races into Super Mario Odyssey was easily the smartest decision Nintendo made during the game's development, because it frees the concept from the restraints of Mario 64's more limited scope and pseudo-linear design. While the racing Koopas of Odyssey do not have nearly as adorable of a name, they are functionally better than Koopa the Quick. The objective remains the same. Get to the goal first. But this time, there are 4 opponents and far more interesting level layouts. Each Koopa takes their own unique path to the goal, encouraging players to consider their understanding of the area and figure out which path is fastest. And they use a lot of Mario's own moves as they run around, encouraging players to utilize Mario's moveset to move as quickly as they can. Sometimes the fastest path requires trickier jumps, which adds a risk-reward element that few other Mario experiences can bring. Other times, the fastest path is just really hard to find, requiring more unconventional thinking. Either way, getting to the goal feels rewarding because it tested player evaluation and execution. It's just a shame that it doesn't feel as tangibly satisfying because you can just go to a shop and buy the same reward. There are a few other problems with the Koopa races too. With the goal being in plain sight, it removes a bit of the mystery and exploration that comes with finding collectibles in strange places. There's a sense of wonder and excitement that simply doesn't exist with an overtly non-diegetic goal area. Plus, the existence of the other racers, while encouraging in some sense, also spoils a lot of the pathfinding opportunities that players may have been better off discovering on their own. In short, the Koopa races are a nice tease as to what exploration-focused challenges in Mario could be, but they probably don't scratch the exact itch that Nintendo fans were looking for with their exploration-focused Marios. But which elements of these races do work? First, the levels need to be expansive and allow for players to not only take different paths, but build their own paths. Instead of having focused and deliberate platforming challenges, levels should foster an environment where challenges appear organically through the player's own pathfinding. Second, the core challenge needs to focus on getting from one location to another location within a certain time frame. Without a destination, players have no clear direction, and without a time limit, players have no need to find a quick path. Finally, there needs to be a constant feedback loop which encourages players to learn and grow as they get better at pathfinding and platforming. The understanding that something is possible is often all that a player needs to bang their head against a metaphorical wall again and again. In short, the ideal exploration-focused Mario game has these 3 elements exclusively, without all of the baggage that came from the Koopa races being compulsory missions in a larger, flawed video game. That game already exists. It's called Luigi's Balloon World, and it's one of the best games you can play on your Nintendo Switch. But there's a catch. If you want to play it, you're gonna have to purchase it under a different name.
Super Mario Odyssey!
Luigi's Balloon World was released as a free downloadable content pack for Super Mario Odyssey in early 2018, advertised as a fun little addition to an already expansive game. But I see it as the exact opposite, because I've enjoyed my time in Balloon World incomprehensibly more than anything in the base game. The goal of Balloon World is to collect balloons. You select a balloon from a menu and are given a certain amount of time to find it. When the challenge starts, you're given an arrow pointing towards the balloon that fades away whenever Mario is moving, and a distance metric that always stays above Mario's head. Now, the goal is set, but it is somewhat obfuscated from the player, bringing back that sense of mystery that the Koopa races lacked. In addition, finding the balloon might be possible within the time limit on the first attempt, but then actually collecting it is a whole other matter entirely, bringing back the pathfinding that made the Koopa races so compelling to begin with. Some of the hiding spots for these balloons are so crazy that it might seem impossible to ever collect them. That's where the other game mode comes into play. Hide It. None of these balloons were placed in the world by Nintendo. All of them were placed by other players who are all under the exact same constraints. This means that in order for this balloon or that balloon or that balloon to be where it is, some other player had to physically be in that location. Plus, the time the balloon hider took to hide their balloon directly determines how much time balloon hunters have to find the balloon, meaning that every time constraint placed on the player is more than reasonable. That fact in and of itself is enough to drive some players to madness over these balloons. Every single square inch of these massive Mario Odyssey levels is put to better use here than anything Nintendo did with the base game, because all of it is fair game for a sneaky new hiding spot that'll be difficult for other players to find. And finding those balloons under such a strict time constraint forces players to platform their way through challenges that Nintendo could have never imagined. It uses Mario's core mechanic, platforming, in a way that actually enhances and tests exploration. In a way, it's almost like Nintendo's cheating. Compared to the core of a game like Odyssey, a game like Balloon World requires far less functional design on Nintendo's end. They merely need to build and maintain the online system. The actual core game of Balloon World is designed by players who happen to find really interesting hiding spots. And these players do a better job at designing an exploration game than Nintendo ever could. No matter how many more moons Nintendo throws into their Mario Odyssey kingdoms, there will never be as many moons as there are balloons. And more often than not, these balloons will have more interesting challenges attached to them. It's also real easy to pick out the easier balloons because of how Balloon World's reward system works. Balloons net the player coins, which in turn are used to accept new Balloon World challenges. The more money a challenge costs, the more difficult the balloon will be to find and collect. Harder balloons net higher prizes, but repeated failure will eat into your profit. Coins also play into ranks, which are a sort of bragging rights indicator as to how much time any given player has spent playing Balloon World. While certainly not the best in-game reward, the feeling of a meaningless number going up is nonetheless enough to justify Balloon World's challenges, especially when there is no easy way out like there is in Odyssey. That said, the clear flaw with Balloon World is still its ties to that larger game. Coins can be used for a lot more things in Odyssey than they can in Balloon World, but because of that, Balloon World doesn't get the reward system it arguably deserves. Plus, Balloon World is locked to Odyssey's post-game, essentially forcing players to take on 20+ hours in order to access an arguably superior game. If Balloon World was separated from Odyssey and designed from the ground up to be fully independent, it would be able to stand on its own as one of the most unique, interesting, and fun concepts Nintendo has ever come up with. Back in 2013, Super Mario 3D World blew my mind with its unapologetic commitment to the style of Mario that I had come to love most. The game was full of creative levels, unique mechanics, and fun set pieces, and it did it all with a personality and swagger that felt almost as if it was easy for them to make. It's a shame that Odyssey wasn't that title for fans of the more explorative Mario gameplay style, but I hope that that title comes soon. I hope that Luigi's Balloon World is the 3D Land equivalent that inspires Nintendo to go all out and build huge and interesting worlds for players to not only be challenged on exploration, but to challenge each other on exploration as well. Or they can make Mario 3D World 2. I'll definitely take it.
Hello, this is my friend Oliver. He's probably not going to be in another video ever again. But I don't think he really likes this spot in the limelight that much, do ya? But can you tell the fine people what else they could watch? Do you think they should watch my last Mario video, or is it too old? Maybe it's not very good now, you know, a few years later. Now you think it's pretty good? Okay, you can watch that. You're saying, oh, what's this? Are we going over here? You're saying that he also made a video about objectivity 2 months ago and how it doesn't exist? That's really smart of you, Oliver. I didn't know you watched YouTube videos that much. And what? You're saying that, like, you could support him by, like, following him on Twitter and, like, backing his Patreon or doing whatever that people want to do or joining the Discord? Whoa, that's really crazy. And, wait, whoa, that's some movement there. I think that means that he wants to go check out the other creators on lastlife.net. Wow, what a smart little guinea pig. But I don't think he wants to be in the limelight anymore. So we're gonna go back on the floor and eat some carrots. Goodbye.